Good evening. I'm Carolyn Chapman. This is my husband Rick Anderson, who has agreed to help me with this video tonight. And tonight we want to talk about ways to increase student engagement in the classroom, talk about mindset, engagement and motivation, and engagement in classroom management. So if we start off with mindset, a lot of research done by Carol Dweck at Stanford regarding fixed versus growth mindset. Fixed mindset is where people are afraid to face failure. They're afraid of their deficiencies being exposed. This translates into the classroom where we see our students being unwilling to raise their hand, say, and answer a question if they don't think that they've got the exact right answer. So what we really want to foster in our students then is growth mindset, which is the ability to take on challenges, even in the face of failure, to take those failures and learn from them and to do an even better job. So one of the most important tips we can use for fostering a growth mindset in our classrooms is the way we speak to our students. And what we want to do is say things like, learn at all cost. We want to say things like, you worked really hard on that. I'm so happy to see all the effort that you put into that. Rather than fixed mindset phrases like, that's a great score, you must be really smart, you got an A without even trying, I'm so proud of you. Or, wow, you did that really fast, because the ability to do things quickly does not always translate with the ability to do things well. So another part about engagement and mindset was a really good thing about Michael Jordan, where he was talking about all the times that he had failed and the 9,000 shots that he took that didn't make it, and how he learned from all of those failures, and that's what made him so great, was his ability to keep going in the face of failure. So we really need to translate that for our students. One of the scientific studies that was done on brain plasticity really proved that the fixed mindset is something that can be relearned. So brain plasticity says that we can create new neural pathways in our brains by learning new skills and having new experiences. So not only has there been research on human beings through Dweck at Stanford, but also actually, scientific investigations into that idea as well. So another thing we talked about was engagement and motivation, and this was really, really interesting, looking at the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So one of the studies that was done back in 1969 by Decci was where people were given a monetary reward to put puzzles together. And it turns out that external reward actually decreased their intrinsic motivation to work on the puzzle. So we can take this and apply it in our classrooms when we look at giving grades. Obviously we have to give grades, but giving grades is an external reward, which actually decreases intrinsic motivation in our students. Now, people are born with a lot of intrinsic motivation. We saw the video with the babies talking to each other, and people want to learn. But they want to learn on their own terms. So one of the things that fosters intrinsic motivation is feeling like you have the freedom to choose, the autonomy to choose what you're going to learn. One of the ways we can foster that in our classrooms is by arranging the desks in a different way. So, when we were growing up, they were always arranged in straight rows.
Right.
And what did that do for us?
Nothing.
We sat there and zoned out, right?
Right.
Or we sat in the very back of the room and, hid. Like, my students, I've had lots of students in the past, and sitting in the back of the room, hoodie over the head, earbuds in, totally disengaged, wanting to be anywhere but where they were. So even though we have to give grades, we have to offer some sort of external rewards for things that our students do in the classroom, we really want to work on the intrinsic motivation as much as possible. And another interesting thing with the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation is that there are degrees of extrinsic motivation. So it can go all the way from motivation where you're just doing it, for example, to avoid punishment, all the way up to where you're really seeing the value of completing these goals. So even though it may be impossible to have a classroom full of students that are completely intrinsically motivated and just are dying to learn, at least we can probably get to the part where they can see value in what they're doing.
Okay.
So the other thing we talked about was engagement in classroom management. So one of the things that we learned was ways to arrange the classroom to get the students to engage more with each other and to become more self-directed. So one of the things that the instructor suggested was to only have the standard rows when you're giving direct instruction. And then you give the students a chance to move together and discuss what they've learned with each other, and then and then maybe move apart again or move into groups. But you don't want to lead them into groups too long, because they will probably start dissolve into some other topic or whatever. And so I've told you about how I've arranged my classroom this second semester of the year, where they're in a circle, and I sit in the circle with them. And this so far has worked out pretty well for us. And so I'm a high school English teacher, and typically what happens is I'll assign them some reading to do the night before, and then when they come to class that day, we sit in a circle and they discuss what they read with each other primarily. Did you ever do that when you were in school? No. So when you were reading a novel in school, what typically happened?
We read it, we came back, we discussed it to the teacher standing in the front of the class, and we had to do whatever report or writing on it.
Right, and so she would call on one person at a time,
Right.
and then everybody else would be zoned out, like, whatever.
Right.
And then she'd call on somebody else and be like, huh, what? Well, I don't know what we're talking about right now. So it has happened a million times. Total lack of engagement. But with this circular arrangement, my students interact with each other constantly. And somebody will say something, another one will respond to whatever that person is saying, and we just keep going until we've covered whatever the reading was for that day. It really has been a great way to let them talk to each other, feed off of each other, correct each other, bounce ideas off of each other, and it really fits much better into the world that they live in today, which is, social media. They're constantly, interacting with each other. They've got this technology coming at them all the time, this rapid pace of info coming at them all the time. It's really unrealistic for us to expect them to sit there and be passive and just absorb the information that we're giving to them. It just doesn't work very well. So ways to arrange the classroom, and finally classroom management strategies for handling difficult students. Some of the things we learned were to employ empathy, to really get to the point where your students understand that you really know what they are thinking, what they are feeling, and admiring negative attitudes. That was a new one for me. So if you have a manipulative teenager that you're dealing with, maybe tell her, wow, you really have the ability to influence other people. I admire that in you, and that could be useful later on in a career, or in a career in sales or management or something like that. Have you ever heard a teacher say anything like that? No. Typically what happens?
Sit down, shut up.
Yeah. And if you don't, you're in trouble.
Right.
And then the kid is totally shut off.
Yes.
And not going to learn anything.
No.
Another one was to leave your ego at the door, which is another real hard one for us to do, especially as adults, especially as authority figures. It's you know, it's my way, it's my classroom. I'm the one who knows what's going on in here, and you need to just be quiet and be good. So what we're doing with leaving ego at the door is we're not letting ourselves give into anger, exasperation, displeasure. If we do that, our ability to function really becomes impaired. And instead, what we need to do is find a way to react positively rather than negatively when these students push our buttons. And I know you had a really good story about your experiences with that in school.
Yes, so English with Mrs. Evans was, she's a 1950s type school teacher. We sit in our rows. When she did roll call, it was alphabetical, so being an A-N, sometimes I would sit where AC was, and AC would sit where I was supposed to sit. So she would start a roll call, and she would get to the B's before she'd realize what would happen, and would have to start all over again. And we knew that once she corrected that somebody later on in the alphabet had done the same thing. It just made for a great day, because then we didn't have to do anything, because she was flustered and done for the day.
I can just picture it.
Yeah.
All right, so I know that was a really quick synopsis of everything that we learned. There's a lot more to say about it, but I wanted to keep it short. So bottom line, teachers should view classroom management as an ongoing exercise in building relationships. And thank you very much.